Hello. I'm here today with Cat Carroll, current legal operations manager at iManage. I'm Kevin Pod, a former attorney and a senior client advisor here at Quizlex. I've been working with corporate counsel for 25 years. Quizlex is an alternative legal service provider. This is part of our podcast series where we talk about running a corporate legal department. Today, the focus with Cat is effective legal operations within a GC office. So we're going to start with efficiency. First off, Kat, thank you for joining. Looking very much forward to hearing your wisdom on today's call. Much appreciated. In your work previously, you've been a legal ops manager or director at a number of different companies, right? You've seen legal departments struggling with business process optimization issues in general, right? Specifically, when we prepped, you mentioned a survey that iManage and Above the Law did, where 65% of respondents noted that they had business process optimization issues. So can you expand on that survey, and can you discuss what areas you see are needing the most changes to be efficient?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yes, I can definitely say, I've actually stood up, I think, 4 legal ops functions now. And this is like the one evergreen problem. I would like to say, while my own skills have evolved over the years, as new technology comes out, the problems I think remain. But yeah, we at iManage, actually for the last 2 years, we've conducted similar surveys so we could kind of compare the results. The most recent one was done with Above the Law, and yes, for the second year in a row, it was listed as the top challenge that teams are facing. I think it's one of those issues that's hard to capture because even though you are moving the needle year by year, because new problems are always cropping up that, we have to learn to solve. Everything from, when everybody went remote and had to change the style of the way that they're working to new tools that are available. Now everything involving AI. I think everybody has kind of been in this learning mode, particularly in the legal function where let's just say, a lot of legal professionals, a lot of attorneys are kind of more comfortable sticking with the status quo or traditionally have been. I think we also, as legal tech becomes, has really, I personally, from my point of view, has really taken off alongside the ubiquity of the legal operations role. I think there's an assumption sometimes coming into a legal operations role that, yeah, you're gonna make everything more efficient. You're going to streamline processes, but historically, I've seen a lot of folks, myself included, fell into that role after a work experience as a paralegal, a contracts manager, and while I had exhibited that ability in those roles, it took me a couple of years to really build up more of like a project manager skill set, which I think is really important for these things as well. I think with everything related to AI too, I think we're kind of, still we're still figuring out how we want to use it. I think everybody got super excited last year because it seemed like we had this magic ahead of us. Then there's folks who are concerned it would steal their jobs. But today, I think, we've gotten to the point where there's continued pressure to try to reduce your low level work using AI, but we still aren't totally familiar with it. We're suspicious of it. Sometimes we just don't even know how to use it. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that. I just want to come back again to kind of the issues around the status quo. I think making the small changes is a great place to start. I mean, I think the one that everyone, will always tell you is make your NDA process more efficient, figure out how to automate
Low
that.
hanging fruit, right? Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
You shouldn't be wasting somebody's time on a document that you're most likely never going to litigate, is something that you're just going to save in a file.
And a perfect example to what you were saying, Kat, is I don't recall in law school or I've taught some paralegal classes that they teach you NDA management in paralegal school, right? It just
right.
doesn't come up, right? So that the expectations and the background and training for the role are very different, as you had talked about. So
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's even 10 years ago. I might have received an NDA and, working in a DMS at a law firm, I would have just put it in the client workspace, and that would have been it. But when you move into the corporate realm, not only are you surrounded by these other teams using technology and doing cool things, and have probably historically done that a little bit longer than legal teams, but I think you also have internal stakeholders that you need to solve challenges around.
Right.
So embracing that change is kind of one of the best parts about being in-house. But yeah, we're still in the middle of the learning curve, I think.
So tools, embracing the change, figuring out the long-term return on investment for what you do, right? Those all make sense. Yeah. Kind of a follow-up or corollary to that question, right? There's been a lot of contraction in legal operations roles, right? They started years ago, they expanded for some time, and now there's been a theme for a number of years, right, of doing more with less. I don't know exactly when it started, but it may have started as much as 10 years ago, or certainly the financial crisis
Yeah.
started that. It feels like it's been going on quite a while. It's not like, oh, this just happened this year or something.
Yeah.
Not at all, right?
I was going to say that, if there's another theme that I have heard year over year that never goes away, it's doing more with less. And I think that's
Right.
true for any realm of the business that's considered a cost center, though, we certainly hope our role is evolving. But yeah, no, I've definitely heard that a lot, both from our customers internally at iManage, within the legal ops community, which I'm sure is very, very close and tight knit.
Right.
But I think it feels I almost want to draw a parallel to the market around AI right now. It's to some degree it's being right sized because you had an explosion, I think, in the pandemic, where the VC money was available, and companies were expanding quickly, and you do kind of sometimes get that echo chamber of trends. And I think just like a technology implementation that is not well planned out around like what problem you're trying to solve.
Right.
I have definitely seen companies where they brought on a legal ops person and then they just wanted to treat them like an executive assistant or do something else that was like maybe not completely aligned with what the person wanted to do in the role, or like something that can bring true value to the legal team and the business. Um, you know, so I think there's a natural cause for contraction as a result of that. And that doesn't mean that like a company is necessarily never going to have a legal operations role. I mean, I think it's kind of inevitable with the continued development of AI that you need somebody on your team who knows how to do these things. I think it's just, between the intersection of kind of the post-pandemic contraction in the tech economy and, like you said, like the recurring ask to do more with less. Yeah, sometimes it does end up on the chopping block. But I do think, it's also an opportunity as well. As I hate to say this, it's a strange thing to say as an employee, but I
Right.
do think it's true that like there was a period of time post an early pandemic where the companies that were doing well, there was sort of a shift between like who had the power, employee versus the employer.
It did
Um,
change a bit. Yeah. You're not the first person I've heard say that. People have
right.
mused about it. They haven't said it too much, but yeah, it's true. It's
And
definitely true.
I personally I can't really say how that impacts the way that people work, but when you are facing a situation where you've come on as a generalist, you don't have a lot of direction, but you also feel like if you quit the job tomorrow, got fired, you could get another job, then I do think that that has an impact. I think that I have seen, particularly at Clock this year, and just other industry events, I would say that, there's a really, really big push now that like the role of legal operations is solidified, to be just generally more strategic and find ways like a growth path that is going to allow you to keep developing your skills and really truly show to the business, even if you're not getting that direction, what value you can bring. And so I don't know if kind of the the change in the economy will continue to bolster that, but I think between economic shifts, advances in legal tech, I do think this is just like a bump in the road.
Well,
Um,
and to that end too, Kat, like the buying practices, the acquisition process that companies go through, that's changed a bit too, right? As you know, 10, 15 years ago, it all felt like it was through IT and finance, right?
Right.
And then legal ops would get involved. Oh, that touches the legal area. Let's ask the legal ops, person or the legal ops administrator, right? And then it's changed over time to be run like an effective, like an executive legal operations function, right?
Yeah.
So you're helping in the acquisition process. So maybe you're helping out your organization by lowering budgets, by acquiring tools. And it's a good kind of a transition, right? So you talk about technology acquisition, right? So my next question is now buying legal technology is a major portion of legal operations role, whether it was always in the past, and it's certainly changed, right? So you've been involved in a number of different companies where you've done software acquisition, right? So give us some pointers on what you see about that process that you can help other legal operations directors or general counsel when they do it. And do you see legal tech becoming a little bit more, ubiquitous, particularly how we talked about in our preparation, how you can apply sort of Six Sigma process and implementation into implementation, and the acquisition process. So I'll leave it open to you. Yeah.
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is never buy technology in search of a problem. Um, you know, I do think that legal ops practitioners are becoming much more savvy about, how to assess technology, how to go through an RFP process, but sometimes we get so excited about these things and want to jump on them so quickly that we don't really sit down and say, is this something that we're doing because it's new and shiny, or are we actually solving a problem? So I think that's really the first step is, you have to figure out what that is. And the problem could be small, it could be big, but the solution needs to match that.
Right.
I've been
So
really,
make sure there's a problem, define it, see if you can measure it. First tip, great one.
yeah,
Keep on rolling. Yeah.
um, you know, and as a kind of a follow up to that, I think one of the conversation threads I've found really interesting lately in the legal ops community is kind of as we all know, CLM has been huge for the last year or a few years. I think also another thing that, certainly with Clock, Ironclad, definitely a lot of growth in tandem with the legal ops function. But, as we've reached sort of peak CLM, ironically now we're circling back to these point solutions that really do address specific problems. That's not the fault of CLM. Sometimes CLM out of the box is perfect for everything you need. But so many times I've seen both in my own experience and just with others I've chatted with that you bite off something, that's too big. You might even think that like you will grow into it, but instead you find just like something where you kind of like lose steam midway through implementation because it's like, what is this even doing for me? You're really stuck in that kind of pre-change management state. So, I think starting small is always great. Working, another thing that I did personally, like I said, I didn't come from a PM background or a particularly technical background.
Right.
I think that's another advantage of being in a company, is that, be buds with your PMs, be buds with your accounting team. You can learn so much from your coworkers, and you know each kind of team in the business has taught me something about the function of acquiring our new technology and just things to think about. But then, I think once you get into the implementation, I do think it's also really important to make sure that if you are going with a major project, it may be your instinct to say, I'm going to prove myself and take this all on by myself. But oftentimes you may be better off, going outside of the business, working with a consultant who can really guide you on the best practices, honestly, kind of upskill you for the next time you have to do it. And, if you can't do that, then I think it's often going back to like the starting small piece, and just
Right.
figuring out maybe you can get help from, a PM that normally works on your product team or something, look within your business. But I think it took my ego a few years to realize that like asking for help doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It can really honestly pay for itself, and when you're talking about using a consultant, because you might be able to take an implementation timeline that realistically is going to take you a year, and have that. And then you're getting more value of the tool instead of just paying for the licensing while you're not really getting anything out of it, and simultaneously like getting bummed about it because it's like
Right.
taking over your whole life.
Well, and using CLM as an example, right, of where you might bite off more than you can chew. One of the things I think I've seen commonly is a lot of traditional legal operations directors come from paralegal or contracts manager background, right?
Yeah,
So when you have a project that you feel is within your bailiwick, right, your
right.
expertise,
Yeah,
right, you're like, well, I don't want to dedicate. I don't want to ask for help and ask for other resources. I don't need a consult in this area. This is what I
yeah,
did before I came here, right?
right.
And then you have ROI problems because you're defining the ROI versus a consultant defining it, et cetera. So touch on that a little bit, is how you measure ROI and and the patience level you need to have, especially for software implementations, et cetera.
Yeah, well, so, first of all, going back to the first step of identifying the problem, I think before you go into the implementation, you should probably figure out how you want to measure whether the problem is solved. Um,
Right.
it, it, you know, Sometimes I found, particularly with CLM, and I think this is one reason it kind of took off, is that it was one of the first tools that many legal ops practitioners could use to start to provide data to the business.
Mhm.
I can remember, I think
Important data, like data they really want and they've wanted for years. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
But it also, it gives legal a baseline to improve upon. I can remember like my first transition from basically a Google Forms intake process to a CLM, and it was like instead of having to go every month and like manipulate data in a spreadsheet, it was like I could just like go to my dashboard and I could really easily provide that information. And there's uh, there can be a learning curve with it too. I would say that and this is true for the implementation question as well. But like you also want to make sure that whatever tool you're going with, if it is something that is going to be a long implementation, something that is maybe in your realm of expertise, but the tool itself is new to you. You also have to make sure that that company is really going to support you. You're going to have a true CSM type relationship, really good support, because sometimes you really do need help. And I say this in the ROI context because I'll just throw it out there. One company I personally love working with is Bright Flag. They're an e-billing platform. I would say their brand is support. It's and
Excellent.
I saw somebody in the Clock forum just the other day talking about how their e-billing provider was going to charge them thousands of dollars for like a health check on their system. Um, in our Bright Flag subscription, that's just part of what we pay for. We have a really active CSM that helps us kind of define those metrics. Is very knowledgeable about what other teams are measuring, how we can manipulate the tool to get us the data that we need. So that's been super helpful for me. But yeah, besides that, I would just
Makes
say
sense.
don't decide how you're going to measure it at the end of the project. You've got to do that as part of identifying the problem.
I've been involved for a lot of years on the sales side of software, right? Selling to organizations. And I have to say, selling to an organization that they themselves sell software, it's more demanding and it's actually easier because like at iManage, right? That's what you do, right? So
Right.
when you're implementing tools on your own, you're aware of user adoption, you're aware of ROI, you're aware of the time it takes. For the companies that I've worked with that like their core business is manufacturing widgets, right? And they don't sell software, or it's producing movies, or an endless amount of things that are not selling software, pharmaceutical, right?
Right.
Automotive. They have a lot more time understanding how implementations work,
Yeah.
user adoption, ROI, health checks, et cetera. So yeah,
Yeah,
really interesting.
that's a really great point. I sometimes I sometimes will forget how it was how I felt originally, like going in house into a tech company from a traditional law firm environment. And
Right.
there's like this whole different vocabulary. I remember
Exactly.
the
Right.
first time I heard someone talking about agile, I was like, "What are you talking about?" But
So
it so
fast.
it creeps into like the company culture almost
Yeah.
that to some degree, yeah, everybody kind of picks up that knowledge and that way of working. And you're totally right about
I remember looking up agile while I was on a call, like, what's agile? Oh, it's development software. Got it, right? Yeah, I had never known that either when I was a lawyer, right? That wasn't in law school or paralegal
Right,
school.
it just doesn't come up, and
No,
that's
not at
I
all.
think that's probably changing. We talked a little bit about how the typical legal ops person historically has been someone who's come up in more of a support role, but that's even something I'm seeing really changing, which I think is a
Right.
great thing. More folks with PM backgrounds, even IT backgrounds. I you know it, kind of more of a specializations versus kind of the
Yeah.
broad strokes generalist. And of course you can't
Makes
do that
sense.
at every company because even in my role I am our legal operations department. So there's you got to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but for folks with unique backgrounds, they don't necessarily need to have legal skills, but they can bring different skills to the table, and sometimes there's even more trust within the team because it's like they can say, oh well, this worked for my other non-legal team, let me teach you about it too.
Okay. Well, Kat, let me transition. First, this has been great. We've talked about investment, ROI, sort of background of legal operations process, how Six Sigma helps, how having defined measurables and metrics and ROI, right? Now let's talk about, and we talked a little bit about AI, but I want to turn the focus to that for a minute. Let's talk about the artificial intelligence elephant in the room, right? First off, you'd agree with this statement that AI has basically saved the world. It's worth every single penny of overhype it's been given, and it's the answer to all our problems, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
not quite. Um, yeah,
We were talking about this before, and I told you that, I've really upskilled my ability to create more beautiful photos without, much more complicated for me in the world where Photoshop was our only tool. But yeah, no, in the legal context, kind of going back to um, uh, the same sort of like early state of learning about how to evaluate technology. I think even folks who were a little bit more skilled in that were kind of naive when we were suddenly bombarded with every single company added AI to
right.
to what they were
And how did
doing.
you learn to separate kind of the
Right?
true
Yeah.
value of AI from some of the marketing fluff? And it's not intentional, right? There has to be a little bit of interest, the possibilities, right? But I would say I've been in an AI company selling artificial intelligence, right? And the marketing fluff is not intended as misdirection ever, not in the slightest bit. But there does tend to be, what is it actually doing versus what the marketing fluff says. And I think the more savvy people can actually hear what it is. So tell me some tips in that area. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think first, similar to kind of admitting you need help, it's okay. Like, I personally, there was a time, I think last year, like right before the new year, where I was like, did I somehow like fall behind? Like, is everybody using AI and getting something out of it?
Am I the
And
last person?
but then, we've started seeing these recent reports from Goldman Sachs, from Bain, and no, that's actually what everybody is admitting is true. Again, you got to identify your problem. You don't want to just like necessarily, buy some cool AI tool because they had a really great demo, and you want to make sure that it's not something you're missing out on. You can start small. I think there's different ways to go about it. I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday who's been developing custom GPTs for different legal teams, and she's found a way to make it a super affordable solution. And sometimes that's a much better way to get started than dumping $100,000 a year on something that you don't really know how to use yet.
Right.
But in terms of like the fluff from what is actually valuable, you know I, I think there's a couple of different things that you can do. One, which I think this should be true for any vendor implementation wherever it's possible, is try to get a POC or a free trial before you commit to it and play around with it then. You don't even have to use real data or anything like that, but make sure the tool works in a way that is user-friendly for you and is really going to meet the need. I think you probably are better off, starting out with more of a point solution, not something that is trying to like redefine the way your entire legal team works. Because then, even if the AI piece is great, you have just so much change management all at once. Um, But, I think we also have to realize that like we are very, very early stage with this. 5 years from now, we'll be, looking back at this time like the original iPhone looks to us now. It's going to look so clunky, and you have some people who are like, "Oh, I'm never giving up my flip phone," but eventually the world changes, and now I've got my smartphone here right now, and it follows me around like my little hand computer, and it's just part of my day. I really think AI is going to be very much like that. I see a lot of parallels too to when the internet transformed the way we work.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, no, I think you've got to just do your diligence. And I think people are really coming around to this idea of like boring AI versus exciting AI. I think
Yeah, we talked about it. Tell me what boring AI, like a defined, small, measurable problem, right?
right,
That's
yeah,
repetitive, administrative, or just something that you want technology to solve.
sure. Yeah, I mean,
Define that, right? Yeah, exactly.
I can remember, doing an Eisenhower matrix exercise in my first legal ops role, and I determined, yes, there were a lot of things I would ideally delegate, but I didn't have anybody to delegate them to. And so, if I had the ability to, create a tech solution to that really would have solved some problems. And the same
Right.
is honestly true for me today. Like I said, I'm a team of one. My favorite iManage AI product right now is our mailbox assistant. In order to really get the full value out of your DMS, you really should be, using it to file your emails, not just in Outlook, but within a matter, or within a client file. It really makes it easier to go back and kind of, if you have somebody else join the team, you transition to another attorney on your team, you have like the full record. But a lot of people don't do it because it's annoying. It's a time suck. It's an extra button to push. But we now have something called Mailbox Assistant that it learns over time how to file your emails, and then it just does it for you. Click of a button, done. Um,
Simple solution gets it right into your document management system, right?
right.
It's a task that has to happen. It's a fairly administrative task. It doesn't take like 3 degrees to learn how to file an email. It just takes some time and attention, right?
Yeah, I talked to somebody else the other day, and I thought they had a really cool idea about developing almost a process for an exit interview. It can be so hard when you leave a company to
Mhm.
remember everything that you've contributed. There's so much institutional knowledge that is lost, and typically when you go through the typical HR exit interview, you're not necessarily like talking about those things. And then you also have those situations where there's like a riff, and you don't like, you're just done. But finding ways to use use a tool to prompt people to like remember and then transcribe all of the things that are kind of
Yeah.
in progress that need to be transferred. I think that's kind of cool too.
It's a good example too of a simple, straightforward kind of small victory. And when we talk about AI victories, right? I still want to talk in the tech area. Do you think there's some aspect of at least early on, and maybe still happening right now, of keeping up with the sort of legal Joneses, or the Jones days of the world, right? With AI, and what should a general counsel's office do to, one, not fall behind, right, but also don't feel like you're keeping up because you're buying technology that doesn't have a problem solution associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of common themes of what we just talked about. Like I said, I think we all got so excited when AI was coming into the market, and it seemed like everybody was doing it, and you just didn't want to be left out. And like anything, once you learn more about it, then there starts to be more, I guess I'll say, suspicion, and particularly in the legal realm, I think the stats are changing every day, but people's comfort level around things like privacy, security, that definitely does have an impact.
And
Um,
there were some well-published, really problematic things early on, right?
right, yeah,
I can't remember what it was, and the making up of the case law, that was like, I mean, every single person in
right,
this profession remembers that, and they were all horrified by it, right? But
yeah,
I think that problem has long been solved, right? Long has changed, right? But it keeps that level of suspicion and risk there.
Totally. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, AI is not a human brain. It's analyzing, syntax, and it's it's coming to a conclusion that could get confused. I mean, I think that is another reason to again start small because let's say you accidentally file an email in the wrong workspace. Well, you can fix that. It's not going to be as embarrassing as submitting a brief with a made up case, or
Right.
even like generating a summary of a contract that makes no sense, or whatever it is. Um, I think. At iManage, we like to call AI a horizontal technology, like electricity or computing. It doesn't really do much for you unless you use it for the correct purpose. So you have to like understand what the tool can do. You have to understand your problem, and like we were saying, you have to outline or figure out how you want to measure that. Um, you know, I think companies as well. Some of the people who've been slower to market, I say people, companies, I'm finding that they're the ones who've been kind of developing more intentional AI solutions. And so that's something that I'm personally really looking out for. I think as we come into budgeting season, I think that's also kind of a good opportunity to do a big assessment. But yeah, you can, I think the other piece that you always want to make sure, and this is something that comes up for me a lot, is like, is buying the solution actually going to save you money and time? And sometimes you want to just buy it because you want to learn what's new. But in reality, maybe delegating something to a human is actually going to, get the ball up and
Right.
running faster. So, find those things where that's not the case.
Got it.
But yeah, so I think once once you're in a legal team and you get that kind of authorization to move forward with an AI process, then you also have to think about the change management piece because like we were talking about, lawyers can kind of be resistant to change, and that is often a huge piece of the skill set that you need as a legal ops practitioner is learning about change management, learning about how you have personalities that are
Right.
not on board. And I think AI is actually kind of I'm excited about it like conceptually for legal teams because unlike some things like CLM or other legal specific tech, it's not siloed within our team. We're all kind of learning
Right.
how to make AI, a best work and in our days. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Part of the consulting my own company does is we actually consult to train the AI that companies do, right? That wouldn't have even come up years ago, right? You wouldn't have thought that you need to train it, but that's actually part of consulting. So when you talk about technology, is defining the task, keeping it simple, staying abreast of what's happening, only getting it when it's going to make sense to you, and then making sure that it's implemented to do the exact thing, right? By the way,
right.
I love that term horizontal technology. I'm completely going to steal that. I will give you credit each time I say it, but I think it's, I talk to a lot of practitioners, operations people, and general counsel. And I'm always trying to find a term that explains
Right.
how it's not a solution in and of itself. It's an add-on, right? Horizontal
Exactly.
technology exactly gets that message across. So
Yeah.
well done.
I also want to say though, if you're currently talking to your GC and they're like absolutely no AI right now, that doesn't mean that you have to completely leave it in the dust. Most of us legal ops folks are pretty big dorks. In your free time, like mess around with it. Don't use your business's confidential information, but with your spare time, build a GPT. There's so many things that you can do to upskill yourself, and then when the timing is right, perhaps when AI solutions do become more ubiquitous in terms of the value that they are driving, then you're not having to learn on the job. You're ready to go,
Makes
and
sense.
you're the expert. And so that's a really exciting opportunity, I think, for a
Well,
lot of folks, even if they don't have a technology background.
yeah. Wonderful. As a last large transition, last topic to transition to here, and thank you again. The final one is sort of the changing dynamics of the legal operations team, right? Some has just changed, evolved over time, and then, of course, some has happened because of the pandemic. So I'll start off kind of a simple question, right? How has COVID and the general shift to hybrid remote work that is now within legal, within corporations, it's just there, right? It's commonly affected all organizations. My own son just graduated from school. He works hybrid as a brand new employee, right? A software engineer. That wouldn't have happened years ago, right? So how has the COVID and now how has COVID, excuse me, and its resultant hybrid environment, remote environment on work, how has that affected finding talented people in terms of operations?
I mean, I'll say for myself, it was somewhat life-changing. When the pandemic hit, I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, which honestly is, these days is becoming more of a tech hub. But in terms of the roles that were available to me outside of the company that I was already working for, they were pretty limited. And then almost overnight, it seemed like we were all working from home indefinitely, and my LinkedIn inbox was filling up with these opportunities for roles that were previously just limited to folks in, the Bay Area, maybe New York or
Mhm.
Chicago. Um, and so I think that's given me basically, all of my last few opportunities have resulted from that shift. But, I think for me, it now feels like completely natural to have colleagues spread out all around the world. I think it's really brought, sometimes sometimes you do get in that Silicon Valley echo chamber. I think there's been a lot more diversity brought to the table through that shift. And I think another thing that is sort of an intangible thing, but I think one kind of key piece of success in a legal ops role is a really close relationship with your GC. And I think across the board, the ability to work from home or even a hybrid schedule, it requires a certain level of trust and check-ins that maybe you wouldn't be having if you were just seeing each other casually in the office every day. So I think that's a really good thing that has come out of the way we work. I think it's also probably pushed the drive toward using a lot of legal tech that we maybe didn't need as much a few years ago. Um, you know, I can't tell
Well,
you
I
how
mean,
much.
this podcast, a perfect example, right? You and I have never met in person. We've been connected on LinkedIn, right? We did preparatory sessions for this, and now we're doing a podcast, from my place in Orange County, and you're right, like we're not even in
Right.
the same place, and
Yeah.
it doesn't feel at all disconnected or as if we'd have to be in the same room to do it. That feeling didn't exist before the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, it was,
when you talk
it's
about hiring, it's the same thing, right?
I think, it's really funny. Like I I remember working in an office, and it's not like I never had Zoom calls because we had other offices. But when I think about things like taking notes, well, now today, turn on your AI note taker and you can just concentrate on the conversation. That's, really, really practical application.
Right.
But, it also brings a new piece of technology into relationship with your colleagues that we just weren't thinking about a few years ago.
Makes
Um,
sense.
but yeah, so I think it's the space is changing. I think probably some of that shift to a more distributed model is probably something that probably it was like the little kernel that started getting folks outside of the like legal professional support professional kind of realm interested in legal ops. And I think the more differences that we can have in the community, the better, because that's how change happens.
I have just two last areas here. We're almost done. One, we touched on this a little bit, so this is a little bit of a repetition, but we talked about the fact that forgetting the changes that COVID has had, which are palpable, just over time, right? Most operations people used to be lawyers or paralegals, and it started out kind of an administrative role, right? And that doesn't seem to be the future, and it's not even the norm now anymore, right? You talked about a little bit about project management as a background. So, how do you see that shifting into the future in terms of operations?
I think it's only going to continue, and I think it's very beneficial for legal ops as a whole. Definitely don't be threatened by it, because as anybody who has come from a legal support role knows, you get sort of this feeling that, you're not an attorney. There's a big separation, but that doesn't mean that your role is not driving as much value, that cannot drive as much strategic value in particular. And I think when you bring in people who are not traditional non-lawyers, but just people with, unique, varied and knowledgeable backgrounds, it becomes almost more clear by comparison, that like, oh, I see that person driving real value and really impressing the business. Why can't I do that too? I think that, I've learned also, from my peers too, just even legal ops is like such a connected space. We all love jumping on webinars, hanging out in forums, and sharing information. Just bringing those new voices to the conversation has really taught me a lot. And I think
Yeah.
that as AI continues to be a thing, that's just going to happen more and more.
Makes sense. And there's both nationwide and local organizations, right? It started as kind of grassroots back in the day, chat groups, et cetera. And now it's moved to there's clock, there's legal ops events, regional and national, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I guess very last area is just a bit of a softball, right? When you think, and again, thank you very much, Kat, for taking the time to prepare and to answer these questions and with the care and the concern that you've exhibited in doing them, right? Talk about you, kind of bring it down to you for a second. What are some challenges you've successfully overcome in your career? And what are some recent victories you can share to help other legal ops professionals benefit from your wisdom and experience?
Yeah, well, I will say I think I've gotten a little vulnerable with you in sharing, I guess you could call it imposter syndrome or just a lack of general true lack of experience. But for me, I really did have to get over that fear of not being enough, not asking for help. I think it served me at a certain point in my career to not have to be the one who was going to my boss and asking questions, just trying to figure out things by myself. But at a certain
Mhm.
point, particularly in a role where sometimes it is just you, you really, really need to get comfortable with not always having all the answers. And again, sometimes just needing an extra pair of hands. For me too, it was really like when I got to the point where I had something to share and that would help a team drive strategy.
Mhm.
There was something at some point that like had to unlock for me to actually contribute to those conversations. I think I learned like pretty early on during annual planning team meetups or whatever, pretty early in my career, that like one of the things that I loved most was brainstorming completely weird out of the box ideas. But I like I didn't let that become something that I would drive to action in my own role all year long until a little bit later. And I think that's all just part of gaining that confidence in yourself and in your role. Um, Probably just like the natural thing that happens as we get older and we realize that we are more than how people see us at work. But yeah, I think, just a number of things that just come from being more comfortable with yourself. But in terms of a victory, well, on the personal side, I would say coming to iManage was a major victory for me. It's been super exciting, not just to work at a tech company, but one where our ICP is someone like me. So it's really fun to get to work closely with our product team or our marketing team as kind of like a gut check on like, does this work for our customers? I found that really, really fun. One of the projects that I have been really spending a lot of time on lately is a product we have called Insight Plus. It's a knowledge library on steroids, and I think it's really going to change the way that we capture and knowledge and even distribute it to the business. So I'm really excited about like the time savings that will come from that, and just kind of the change in the way that we store, valuable information that sometimes tends to get lost. Things like outside counsel guidance that, you find yourself paying for 3 times because you've had different people join and leave the team and they didn't know that we've already gotten that answer. So yeah, that's a fun thing that I've been
Good.
working on lately.
Good. Kat, again, thank you for all of the answers today, all the time you took in doing it. Appreciate you sharing both organizational and work experience, and then some personal stuff as well too. So thanks again. It's been great. Again, this is Cat Carroll, Legal Operations Manager at iManage. Thanks again.
Thanks, Kevin.
Talk to you.